Hello, 5 years after the start of a war many said was all about oil, Iraq is opening up its oil fields and foreign companies are lining up to cash in. 6 oil fields will be open to short and long-term international contracts. However, the Iraqi government appears set on keeping the oil production and profit for Iraqis. And why wouldn't they? As if to underline the point, crude oil surged on Monday to another new record of $143 a barrel. Nicole Johnston has more.
Iraq's oil fields now available to foreign companies who want to stake their claim. But the government isn't giving away the profits. So far, they're only offering service and consultancy contracts. The oil companies wanted a share of the income, called a production sharing agreement. Instead, they'll simply be paid to develop the fields.
The standard form of contract to be offered to these companies will be a service contract, not a production sharing agreement. The detailed format of the contract will be explained to the Iraqi people, the true owners of the Iraqi riches.
Iraq hopes to sign these contracts within a year. In the meantime, it will use international oil companies for advice. But these deals still haven't been signed.
These are consultancy kind of contracts for technical support, and we have still not reached any agreement with any company. We are losing time. The idea at the time, at the beginning of the year, when some of the companies were invited to render technical support, was to bridge the gap.
But even without the contracts, foreign oil companies are already operating in Iraq, working for free to get a head start on their competitors. And here's where they are. Up north in Kirkuk is Shell. In the south near Basra, BP is in the Rumaila oil field. Close by is ExxonMobil in Al-Jazeera. Also in the south are consortiums including Chevron, BHP Billiton and Total. There's another wild card in this debate, and it's up north in Iraqi Kurdistan. Here the regional government says the constitution gives the oil reserves to them.
What are the Kurds going to do? Because they've already signed 15 different contracts, at least 15 different contracts with 20 different companies from 12 different countries. So will the Kurds abide by whatever oil law is passed in Baghdad, I think remains to be seen.
The federal government says these contracts are illegal. Meanwhile, the standoff continues over the country's national oil law. It's been in limbo for 2 years, while the regions battle with Baghdad over who owns the oil. And there's a third force to be reckoned with, foreign oil companies. But this time round, Iraq is controlling the profits. Nicole Johnston, Al Jazeera.
Earlier on the news hour, Jane Dutton spoke to Dr. Kamil Mahdi, a senior lecturer in Middle East economics at the University of Exeter. He says this announcement is a worrying development.
If what we hear is correct, that a number of companies are being invited to provide technical support for a number of fields, each company being invited to advise on one field, covering virtually all of Iraq's current production. This really smacks not of technical service agreements, as the minister says, but really of management service agreements. And this is quite worrying in the context that these companies will also be in a position to bid for whenever any production sharing or production sharing like agreements are offered.
So as far as you're concerned, the deal is already done, these oil companies have already been invited in, and this is just words to try and appease the Iraqi population, possibly?
Well, there's been so many rumors, and there clearly are a number of companies invited to advise on a number of fields, and that is worrying. It's a different matter when you invite not a major oil company, an integrated oil company, but a service company to provide a specific service in a specific field. But what we have here is wholesale invitations of the majors, the oil majors, the ones who enjoyed the fruits of Iraqi oil for 50 years and presented nothing to the Iraqi people.
Let's look at some other news. Pressure is mounting on Robert Mugabe after a one-man election in Zimbabwe that much of the world has condemned as a farce. The Prime Minister of Kenya is calling on the African Union to suspend him. Raila Odinga says the AU should neither accept nor entertain Mugabe till he holds free and fair elections. And a US-drafted resolution is calling for the UN Security Council to impose an arms embargo on Zimbabwe and freeze the assets of specific individuals and companies. But Mugabe's fellow leaders have avoided any strong criticism at an African summit in Egypt. That's where Amr El-Kaki sent this report.
Just hours after his controversial swearing in as Zimbabwe's president, Robert Mugabe walked into the African Union summit in Sharm el-Sheikh looking for a boost for his disputed legitimacy. Zimbabwe's election was not originally on the summit's agenda, but Mugabe's attendance made it the focus of attention. African leaders, most of whom didn't exactly come to power through democratic means, were not prepared to criticize him directly. The summit's host, Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak, didn't even touch on Zimbabwe when he spoke of the need to solve the continent's disputes. The strongest African voice on the issue came from the AU Commissioner, John Ping, though he stood short of criticizing Zimbabwe's elections.
Africa must fully shoulder its responsibilities and do everything in its power to help Zimbabwe parties to work together so as to overcome current challenges.
But the United Nations was adamant something has to be done and done soon. The Secretary General's deputy called the situation in Zimbabwe a grave crisis and told African leaders this is the moment of truth.
This is the single greatest challenge to regional stability in Southern Africa, not only because of its terrible humanitarian and security consequences, but also because of the dangerous political precedent it sets.
If any indication, the first day of the 53-nation gathering showed how Africa's development needs can't be isolated from political reform. The continent's real issues seemed overshadowed by how to deal with Mugabe, a topic that apparently divided African leaders. Whether the African leaders' silence was out of diplomacy or out of fear, that's not clear. President Mugabe had threatened to point fingers at his fellow heads of states if anyone were to criticize him. And off the record, some officials have gone as far as saying many leaders hoped that he wouldn't have shown up in the first place. Amr El-Kaki, Al-Jazeera, Sharm el-Sheikh.
Well, Pakistan says it was after gunmen, but a group of people in the Khyber region say their friends and family were innocent victims of a military operation. 8 civilians were killed, several more were injured in an attack on the headquarters of a local religious leader. The strike came on the third day of a Pakistani paramilitary offensive in and around the northwestern city of Peshawar. Sahel Rahman has more.
A military attack in the early hours of Monday left up to 8 civilians dead and several injured in the Bara Tensil area of the Khyber Agency. The target, the headquarters of a local religious leader, Haji Namdar. The nighttime aerial assault left large parts of the village in ruins. Local people rushed to help free survivors trapped under the rubble. Up to 12 are still unaccounted for. Haji Namdar survived the attack, but denies any anti-state activities and denounced the assault as unjustified by the provincial government.
We were praying when we heard the explosions. We tried to find out what happened and were told a missile hit a house. We think 6 were sleeping there at the time. All the circumstances are very unclear.
However, the build-up continues in and around the Peshawar area. The military moving in convoy to areas beyond the regional capital. Their hardware on full display, sending a strong message out to those in the vicinity that they mean business. Military checkpoints leading into the tribal areas have seen a visible increase in personnel and munitions. Civilians searched going in and out. The aftermath of military assaults is visible across the Khyber Agency, as these exclusive Al Jazeera pictures show. In Bara, the meeting places for local armed religious groups accused by the authorities of anti-state behaviour have been targeted. All that's left is the rubble and the speakers that once called the faithful to prayer or to listen to speeches being made on banned radio stations. This simple concrete wall is all that separates the perimeter of Peshawar from the Bara district. The men here carry weapons and see that as their right in an area that has a reputation for being lawless